This year, for the first time, members of Generation Z, those born after 1997, are expected to outnumber baby boomers in the workforce.
When asked to come in for an 8 a.m. meeting, my Gen Z new hire said, "Ugh, sorry, I can't make it. I have a workout class. Should this be allowed?"
My visceral reaction was, are you kidding me?
I'm literally 6 months into my first corporate job and I already want to quit.
I woke up this morning and I was like, you know what today is? Today is the perfect day to go over the bare minimum Monday routine.
You say right now you just won't hire Gen Z employees.
No, we don't. It's been a nightmare with 95% of the ones that we have hired.
I have a very high standard of living and like a very low work ethic, and so I'm just like constantly caught in between like wanting to make money but also not wanting to do anything to actually make money.
What do you mean, what is my dream job? My dream is not to have a job.
Gen Z, the youngest generation entering the workforce, is rejecting work culture as we know it and redefining success on their own terms. Because of this, Gen Z has gotten a lot of backlash, being labeled as lazy, unmotivated, and a burden on society. And it's gotten to the point where some employers are avoiding hiring Gen Z altogether. But is this really fair? It's not new for youth to struggle with motivation, so have the older generations just forgotten how lazy and unmotivated they were in their youth? Or are today's kids really just less willing to work? I myself feel very connected to this topic as I'm the age bordering on Gen Z, if you couldn't tell from my space buns. Being born in 1995 and therefore a zillennial, I can relate to Gen Z's rejection of corporate nonsense, but in contrast, the millennial in me still feels that girl boss pressure of the 2010s to pursue CEO status.
You got into Harvard Law?
What, like it's hard?
So today we're going to deep dive into it and see if Gen Z's approach to life is delusional or if vibing their way into adulthood is actually going to be better for everyone in the end. I personally think that this decline in Gen Z's aspirations all started with their change in mindset of education, and not just college education, but high school.
School doesn't prepare you for real life. It doesn't prepare you for the real world. And I'm not saying drop out of school. I'm saying that it doesn't measure whether you're talented or creative or have a business mind or whether you're artistic. It doesn't measure that. It measures that you're good at test taking, you're good at memorization, you're good at sitting in one place, doing what you're told, and just following directions.
I have a theory that us millennials actually started this trend where we started to question what schools were actually teaching us. If you're on Tumblr in the late 2000s, early 2010s, you'll remember all of the memes about how silly it is that we're prioritizing learning about the mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell and Pythagoras theory, but we didn't learn any real life skills like how to file our taxes. And I feel like these memes were the foundation of the distrust of education. Gen Z took this meme and ran with it to the point of saying, we're not just going to rebel against the curriculum we're taught, we're going to give up on the school system as a whole.
This math stuff is never going to help me in the real world. I'm done.
We're going to lift this couch on 3. You ready?
Oh, shit.
In a survey, Gen Z was actually asked about their disappointment in the school system not preparing them for life, and they found 44% said that school only taught them very basic computing skills, while 37% said that the school system, for children under the age of 16, didn't prepare them with the technology skills they needed for their planned careers. 40% considered learning new digital skills essential to future career options. While I agree with a lot of the pushback Gen Z has towards the education system, I think in our millennial youth, our rebellion towards the education system was because we didn't have quite the right view on the purpose of school. While there are a lot of problems in the school system, and yes, I do think we should be learning more practical skills like relationship building, understanding and regulating emotions, effective communication, and personal finance, instead of just mathematical equations most of us won't ever use again, there still is value to learning these things. This value comes in learning problem-solving skills, working in a group, working solo, time management skills, and so many other things where the subject worked on isn't necessarily as important as the skills gained from learning it. The purpose of education is not the content you learn, but to develop your character to be industrial and honest, and to respect and follow rules, which allows us to live in an orderly society. We can continue the progress of past generations by continuing to innovate with the common goal of improving the lives of everyone around us. As well, Ray Dalio, one of the world's leading financial minds, says strong education doesn't just teach knowledge and skills, but also strong character, civility, and work ethic that provides a healthy respect for rules and law, low corruption, and enables people to unite behind a common purpose and work well together. This leads to innovation and invention of new technologies. Now, I feel like this quote can ruffle some feathers, as currently there's a lot of pushback against the school system's purpose just being to create orderly, submissive citizens. I don't know if you're also on that side of the internet, but I don't want to get too deep into that in this video. I just include this to say that I think Gen Z has gone a bit far in the rejection of education, and that could be the downfall of their future if they don't learn the practical skills that come from succeeding in school. Next, we're going to talk about Gen Z's attitude towards college, but before we do, I do have to talk about today's sponsors. Did you know that 40% of supplements bought online do not contain a detectable amount of the ingredient listed? This failure from the FDA's supplement approval process leaves consumers unsure whether the supplements they're buying will actually work or if they're just falling for marketing scams. Well, this is the problem that Equip is trying to solve, and not with a magic pill, but with real food solutions. Equip emerged from a realization that the supplement industry is full of lies and deception, but more importantly, that the best source of nutrition is real food itself. They are committed to sourcing the best ingredients, ensuring each product is as natural and clean as possible. I've been using their beef protein that contains 21 grams of bioavailable complete protein from grass-fed beef, all in one scoop. And one of my favorite things is that it's made from just a handful of carefully sourced ingredients. On that note, have you guys ever tried hitting protein goals? It's actually kind of hard unless you're very intentional about every meal you're eating, and in the midst of the chaos of young children in my life, I just have a hard time prioritizing that. And that's why I love Equip's beef protein, because they make it easy for me to get my protein in with, again, real food ingredients. They come in a range of flavors, but my favorite is chocolate because I just mix it with milk and so it tastes like chocolate milk. So if you would like to try out the cleanest protein on the market, Equip is offering my viewers 20% off when you use my link, equipfoods.com/embers, with my promo code embers. And if you combine this offer with a subscription, then you get 35% off your subscription. Once again, that's equipfoods.com/embers with the code embers to kickstart your real food health journey. One of the hardest times of day for me is the afternoon, because all morning I've been running around with the kids, and then nap time and quiet time come and I crash. The problem is that that's when my work hours start. Since I'm trying to balance being a stay-at-home mom and a YouTuber, I just have to use the time slots available for work, which means working in the afternoon when I'm so very tired, just because that's the only option I have. I'm not complaining, it's just the reality. So with that in mind, I've been trying to find new ways to get out of that afternoon slump, and one of my favorite ways is with our sponsor, Pique. Pique's Sun Goddess Matcha is made with the highest quality and purest ingredients for maximized benefits and bioavailability. It contains slow-release caffeine, giving sustained energy without jitters, caffeine crashes, or anxiety. I love the Sun Goddess Matcha because it gives me that energy I need to get through the second half of the day without all the negative consequences from having a second cup of coffee. If you remember from my vlog days, I used to have a second cup of coffee around midday, but it would always backfire because I'd end up shaky and anxious. Now I enjoy my Sun Goddess matcha around noon, and it really helps me tackle my workday. It's also just really delicious. Being ceremonial grade, it means that it's top quality. So if you would like to try out Pique's Sun Goddess matcha as well, you can get up to 15% off plus a free rechargeable frother and a cup when you use my link. Thank you to Equip and Pique for sponsoring today's video, and thank you to you guys for supporting my videos, whether that's through just watching the ads or clicking the links in the description. And if you just skip past the ads, I get it, that's fine too. But now let's get back to Gen Z's hatred of education. The rejection of education does not stop at the high school level with Gen Z, as we know. This sentiment feeds right into Gen Z's view of college, as just 39% of Gen Z said advancing their education is important to them, and only 46% of them said they don't think college is worth the cost.
Sitting here in my 2x2 little college dorm, but I'm just trying to figure out, what's the point in college? I'm gonna be here 4 years to get a degree for something I might not even get a job in that field. So, like, it's no guarantee.
One of the biggest reasons Gen Z has rebelled against higher education is because they're seeing that for a lot of people, it doesn't actually produce anything for them. Or at least they're seeing the promises of education being false. Millennials grew up being told that you needed post-secondary education to get ahead in the world, and I even remember being told that it doesn't matter what kind of education you get, just anything post-secondary, get a degree, and you'll have a step ahead of everyone else. Which sounds crazy now, but we went for it, and that's how we got all the jokes about millennials with psychology degrees working at Starbucks, because that's what we were told to do and we couldn't get jobs after.
Okay, genuinely, what is the point of taking general classes in college? Like non-major specific classes. Why am I taking classes that have nothing to do with my major? I needed a fine arts credit, so right now I'm in a class called the History of Rock. I mean, it's a fine class, but kind of feels like a waste of my time. It's basically some hippie telling me his favorite rock songs and why they matter. I mean, that's a fine conversation to have, but why did I have to pay thousands of dollars for it? Like, how is this not a scam?
Phoebe Lee, a millennial in the corporate world, reflects on these false promises made, saying, "How did I end up in this position? The messaging I received throughout my schooling was that I needed to absorb all the knowledge and jump through all the hoops they placed for us in order to get a good job, which will ultimately lead to a good, fulfilling life. But the mirage has been lifted, and the real world is nothing like the adults made it out to be. Was it all a lie?" Now, with millennials speaking up about their experiences in the workforce, Gen Z has the opportunity to weigh their options and actually see what happens when they go blindly into post-secondary education. And they're seeing that if the career path they desire doesn't actually require post-secondary education, then why would you do it? But it's not only the lack of benefits of a degree that's deterring Gen Z from post-secondary education, it's the enormous cost. The cost of university has exploded to the point where it's too expensive to just get a fun college experience if you're not going to get a career at the end of the day that will pay off all those bills. The widening gap between the value and the cost of college has started to shift Gen Z's attitude towards higher education. A 2022 survey by Morning Consult found that 41% of Gen Zers said that they tend to trust US colleges and universities, the lowest percentage of any generation. It's a significant shift from when millennials were in their shoes a decade ago. And looking specifically at how much the cost of college has changed over the years, we see that the average annual increase in college tuition from 1980 to 2014 grew by nearly 260% compared to the nearly 120% increase in all consumer items. Here in Canada, the cost of post-secondary is quite a bit lower than in the United States, but you're still looking at a huge investment if you're only going to get a mid-range salary from it. College used to be affordable enough that people could just do it for fun, as they labeled it the college experience, but Gen Z doesn't really get that option anymore. In the UK, where 1 year of university costs $12,000, recent data has found that the gap in earning potential between graduates and non-graduates shrinking, stress testing the question of whether a degree is worth it. In the US, tuition averages $20,000 per year, a cost that has more than doubled in the 21st century, and recent Pew data found only 22% of US adults report seeing the cost of college as worth it, even when students need to take out loans. Only 1 in 4 said it's extremely or very important to have a 4-year college degree in order to get a well-paying job in today's economy.
Please tell me that as a Gen Z that just recently graduated college, that there are going to be other people that feel this way too. With how the economy has been, and with what our parents and grandparents told us for almost our whole lives of like, hey, go to college, get a degree, you'll get a great paying job, you'll have this amazing, fantastical life. And now they flip the switch on us, and now that's something that is almost impossible for our generation. I am so hopeless as a Gen Z with the fact that with my student loans, which are over $100,000 because college is that expensive, I now have no choice but to move back home with my parents and live with them for several years to save up money. But then in reality, what money will I be saving when I'll have to be paying $1,100 every month for my student loan payments because I owe over $100,000 in student loan debt?
And so if university isn't offering that upper hand that it once had for previous generations, then I think Gen Z is making a level-headed decision to not use it outside of the professions that require it. And with that, it's unfair to put that label on Gen Z that they have no career ambitions when they just don't want to be forever in debt to a university. We We will get back to the effects this rejection of university has on Gen Z, but first I want to talk about how the state of the world is affecting Gen Z's life choices. Gen Z has had a rough ride for the start of their life as they've had to deal with coming to age during turbulent times. Compared to their predecessors, Millennials and Gen X, Gen Z has had to deal with one recession, one looming recession, pressures of climate change, a pandemic, and of course, a cost of living crisis. And all of these things affect the life direction Gen Z pursues.
Here's the truth. The fatigue of just being alive is really starting to set in.
One of the biggest limitations Gen Z is dealing with is, as we know, the housing crisis. I feel like this topic of the housing crisis is a little bit beat to death, but it is so important to note because of the effects it has on Gen Z's future. Between home prices and rental prices, housing is one of the biggest struggles of this generation because wages aren't keeping up.
Hey, I just want you to know that I'll never be able to buy a home because I just bought shampoo, deodorant, a new toothbrush, some new gel for my hair, and a little thing that scrubs my scalp, so no homeowner here.
To afford the median priced home of $400,000, Americans need an annual income of roughly $160,000. But the median household earns just $74,000, only 45% of the recommended amount. And if you, like most adults, can't afford to buy a house, you won't find much luck in the rental market either. Between 1999 and 2022, rent has grown 135%. Incomes have only increased by 77% in that time.
Isn't it wild that rent prices are so bad that genuinely where my brain goes is, oh, okay, but if I lock in a $2,400 one-bedroom apartment and I stay there for 30 years, in 30 years, when rent for a one-bedroom apartment is $35,000, all the young kids are going to look at me and come to me on the street interviews and be like, how did you do it? How did you find a one-bedroom apartment in Toronto for $2,400? Tell us your secrets. That's where my brain goes, which is unwell.
And looking at how that impacts people's spending abilities, the average portion of a person's income that goes to rent was 25% in 2000. It's now 40%, which I think is so funny. We grew up being told, don't spend more than 30% on housing. And then we're given this market where you can't spend 30% on housing. You have to spend more. And people are still saying that it's the young adults' fault for not being responsible with their money. Anyways. And this has led to an epidemic, if we can call it that, of people living with their parents for longer than any other generation. Almost half of those aged 18 to 29 are currently dwelling with their parents, marking the highest level observed since the Great Depression era. And the cost of housing is only the tip of the iceberg, as we know inflation affects everything we spend our money on. This survey found that among 1,000 Gen Zers, 52% of respondents said that they don't make enough money to live the life they want, pointing to the cost of living as one of the main financial challenges Gen Z faces.
Man, Gen Z just don't want to work anymore, do they? That could not be farther from the truth. Gen Z is actually one of the smartest and most intuitive generations that we have. They realize that the 40-hour work week is not getting them the ability to afford basic necessities. What is the motivation to work 40 hours a week or 60 hours a week if you can't even afford rent? Nobody wants to just continue to work and work and work and not be able to pay their bill. They're not a lazy generation. They're just tired.
When you're a young adult just trying to get your footing in the world, but you're faced with insufficient income and extraordinary inflationary environments, it makes it very difficult to achieve any financial goals or ambitions. And I want to clarify that little treat culture isn't to blame either. The Bank of America report found that nearly 70% of Gen Zers surveyed are implementing lifestyle changes, including cutting back on dining out, passing up on outings with friends, and shopping at more affordable grocery stores. Gen Z wants a lot of the things that previous generations have valued and are willing to work for it. They're just not given the option.
Being a single person in America in 2024, I do not recommend it to anyone. I am about to just find a man off the side of the road who looks like he has money, suck it up and marry him. I just finished grad school, okay? And before y'all get in my comments saying you shouldn't have gone to school, you're right. But I am passionate about this career and I just want to make a difference in people's lives. Kill me, okay? So I'm in the process of getting pre-approved for a mortgage loan. And they ask me, what is your monthly repayment for your student loan? So I go to see what my actual monthly repayment is. And mind you, my student loan amount is not that high. It's nothing obscene. I owe $748 a month. There's no way. I am in my late 20s. Living at my parents', lived there for 2 years. I've been working full-time while in school, mind you. I've paid off my old car loan that I was upside down on. I never buy anything for myself, ever. I don't do anything. And yet it still gets me nowhere. Like, I'm looking for houses and every single house is at least $200,000 and they need a shit of work. Like, it just feels like I am running on a hamster wheel. Not trying to be dramatic, but it is just so exhausting. I am doing everything I'm supposed to. I'm paying off debt. I'm living well below my means. Yet I still feel like I'm exactly where I was 4 years ago, maybe even worse.
And so Gen Z is entering the workforce with no hope of achieving the American dream. So a lot of them are just living aimlessly, not sure what to strive for. It's not that they don't have goals and ambitions, it's that they're trying to find alternative lifestyles that they can find peace in when the lifestyle of previous generations isn't available to them. I think this is something very unique about Gen Z that is being overlooked, that they are the first generation in quite a few generations to have no hope for their future.
The one thing about growing up in Gen Z, and not to say, like, of course, every generation before us has had their own things to deal with while they were growing up. I think the thing that sucks the most about Gen Z is the fact that, like, it's like no matter what we do, the world keeps changing at such like a rapid pace, making it damn near like unlivable for us that there's nothing we really can do. You know what I'm saying? There's no plan that's like, it's not like how back in the day was like, if you follow this set plan, even if it doesn't work like exactly how you want it, you'll still be like in a better off position. For us, like Gen Z, like whether it be like the whole college thing or just working a 9 to 5 or just trying to be your own boss, trying to go sometime down some business route or whatever the case may be, it's like no matter what you do, you're probably still gonna get in the end in some sort of way or fashion.
While other generations have gone through their fair share of turmoil, many of them preserved hope for their future, or at least for their children's future. With the lack of financial certainty and the climate crisis going on, Gen Z just doesn't have that. And people aren't recognizing the role that hope plays for a generation to thrive. In this article from the Princeton University Press, they talk about the importance of hope. There's increasing evidence that the most important dimension of well-being to future outcomes is not happiness, although of course it matters, but hope. Hope is distinct from optimism, which is the belief that things will get better, as it is based on individuals believing that they can make things better and reflects agency. In contrast, people without hope tend to have miserable life outcomes. People need hope and aspirations to pursue goals. Hope feeds agency and gets people off their butts because they feel like they actually have a chance of achieving something. And the research finds that having a mentor who supports the hopes and aspirations of the young is a critical factor in their decisions to invest in their futures, such as in education, and to avoid risky behaviors which jeopardize those futures. And this is why Gen Z has been labeled the most nihilistic generation yet, because they're living in a world with constant crisis and despair. Sophia, age 23, reflects on this, saying she suspects that her generation may never own homes, accumulate comfortable retirement savings, or achieve other traditional financial milestones. So it's interesting that older generations are on Gen Z's case about not being better participants of society, when Gen Z thinks that they'll be a homeless, pensionless, and under 6 feet of water by the time they're retirement age. And this also plays into Gen Z's lack of trust in authority. They don't believe that the government or education system will solve any of the problems they're dealing with, and so they don't want to play into the system. For Gen Z, trust in institutions is at an all-time low. In the US, young people feel their government hasn't earned their trust. Older generations haven't earned their trust, whether that's in regard to climate, gun reform, police reform. Young people feel they are not being listened to. Without this trust that the people with the power to change will actually change anything, Gen Z is left to figure it out on their own. On top of that, I think it's interesting to know that this is happening to the least religious generation, as that plays into their ambitions as well. Pew Research repeatedly found that Gen Z is the nation's least religious generation, with about a third having no religion, about the same proportion among millennials, compared to 23%, 17%, and 11% among, respectively, Gen X, baby boomers, and the silent generation. During trying times, people have always had their religion to fall back on to give them hope, and Gen Z doesn't even have that. I won't go too deep into the world of religion. I just find it interesting that Gen Z seemingly has all their stars aligned to have no drive for their future. Also, to clarify, this of course isn't to say that there aren't some Gen Zers who have aspirations. Just overall as a generation, they don't have a lot of incentive to pull themselves up from their bootstraps when they don't have anywhere to go once their boots are on. So how does a generation with no value of education and no motivation act in the workforce? I think it's complicated. So far, Gen Z has a pretty bad reputation of being difficult to work with, to the point that it's affecting the hiring patterns of employers.
So you say right now you just won't hire Gen Z employees.
No, we don't. It's been a nightmare with 95% of the ones that we have hired. I once terminated an employee, and her father called me 24 hours later asking how he could help get his daughter's job back. I'd never heard of that before. When I've lost my job, I didn't tell my parents to go call for me.
In 2024, Resume Genius asked 625 US hiring managers which generation is the most challenging to work with. The results found that just as boomers had concerns about millennials, Gen Z is now encountering similar criticism. Nearly half of hiring managers named Gen Z as the most challenging generation to work with. Even 45% of Gen Z hiring managers share the same sentiment.
A millennial manager said there's nothing quite as humbling as receiving applications from Gen Z job applicants. Amy Gastman, owner of a UK-based vegan bakery, says she posted a job opening for a baking assistant and barista. She received an influx of applications, mostly from Gen Zers, and was flabbergasted at the lack of professionalism she found. She noticed things like people not using a single capital letter on a resume. Apparently, one applicant even said, "I'm having a brat summer," on a job application.
This head of HR gave their reasoning, saying, "In our organization, the Gen Zs I have interacted with can be exhausting because of their lack of discipline, and they like to challenge you. They think they're better than you, smarter than you, more capable than you, and they will tell you to your face."
I just got home from a job interview, and they said that I'm not going to get it because I wasn't dressed appropriately for the interview. I'm giving business in my little sex skirt, and look at my tie. Anyways, the skirt is thrifted and the top is from Mixed Fashion.
Now, despite this being pretty incriminating evidence, Gen Z hasn't always had this reputation. Up until a few years ago, the work ethic news was positive for Gen Z. After declining from boomers to millennials, work ethic made a comeback among Gen Z in the 2010s, until it didn't. The number of 18-year-olds who said they wanted to do their best in their job, even if it sometimes means working overtime, suddenly plummeted in 2021 and 2022. In early 2020, 54% of 18-year-olds said that they were willing to work overtime. By 2022, it was only 36%. Now, the reason I left this section till now is because we needed the context of the lacking and overpriced education system mixed with the lost American dream to realize why Gen Z has a different perspective on careers. As we know, generations prior were sold a story that if you work hard and put your time in, you'll have a bright future, and Gen Z isn't getting that same opportunity. As the economy has changed post-pandemic, Gen Z has less belief that the work required to succeed in their careers will be worth the effort.
All of this is made up things that we force ourselves to do just to do something, that not a lot of this is real. And they don't necessarily have poor work ethics. They just know that none of it really matters. This is the generation that grew up not knowing if they were going to come home from school, seeing economic promises ripped away from them, knowing that things that were once guarantees for them, if they did everything right, that doesn't matter anymore. So I personally don't blame them for being a little disaffected and for not playing into the whole system of like, jobs are everything, this is purpose.
Not only are 18-year-olds less focused on worth, they're less likely to expect they will enjoy it. In the 2000s, millennial 12th graders were more likely than boomers were in the 1970s to expect that their future chosen work would be extremely satisfying. But in 2022, only 59% thought their career would be extremely satisfying, a 23% drop and another all-time low. As the years have passed, young adults are less likely to work overtime, less likely to enjoy their work, and less likely to just have work be the center of their lives. They've seen boomers work their entire lives working at one company just to be dropped when that employee isn't convenient anymore. They've seen millennials work their way up the corporate ladder and still not be able to pay off their student loans. And then they look at their own futures and see that even if they work the overtime hours, get the extra certificates, and claw their way up the corporate ladder, they still won't achieve the same standard of living that their parents had.
So I'm just supposed to sit here for 40 hours a week for the next 45 years of my life?
Only if you live for 45 more years.
Gen Z is burnt out even before they've entered the workforce. The thing that motivated people to work hard and stay at a company was the prospect of buying a humble home, having a wife and kids or husband and kids, owning a nice car, and maybe going on a little vacation. Gen Z, with their hyper-awareness of the world they live in, aren't able to make the same sacrifices and have the same slice of cake at the end. And this is why we saw the I don't dream of labor trend in 2021.
I have a job interview in like 15 minutes and I just want to say that I hate this. I hate having to be professional and dress professional and talking about things that I like barely care about. I don't want to work. I want to read, and I want to read so much that I forget to nourish myself, and then I die reading, because at least I'll die doing what I love and not having to slave away serving the corporate machine.
Now, I feel like this trend was overall net positive because it's totally normal for people to not love their 9-to-5 job and to just work so that they can live their lives. But it did feel like this was a shocking concept when it came out because it was in direct contrast with the messaging millennials grew up with, being very career focused and that your career should be your identity. It was also in direct contrast with other generations' mindset of loyalty to a company trumping everything. And so Gen Z is just trying to figure out what their new path is. And for a lot of them, it just looks like prioritizing a healthy work-life balance. If work isn't going to give you the dream life you thought you would have, then at least let's enjoy the day-to-day while we have it. This looks like drawing hard lines with overtime hours, using the vacation days that are offered to you, taking mental health days when you need it, and just not working more than you're being paid for. I honestly think you can't hate on them for that, but that's my opinion. I've talked about this before, but I had a similar experience when I was working the corporate life. I was working away doing just the work they were paying me for and got reprimanded for it. I was told I need to come in before my start time and to not be afraid of staying late if I wanted to advance in the workplace, and I was having none of that. So I left. That work environment was not for me. With that, maybe I'm a little biased towards Gen Z. I feel like the best case scenario here is that with all the effort Gen Z is putting into having a better work-life balance, maybe it will result in companies offering more perks like higher salaries, more vacation days, maybe more flexible schedules. These young workers are seeing through the guise of the prestige of working at a high status company and won't be walked over because of it.
Gen Z does not want to go into an office because there's a pool table there.
I think my favorite part about this is how we were taught for years, from middle school all the way up to college, about how fun and cool it would be to work at Google, right? It's so creative. And then Gen Z turns around and we go, okay, but how much are you paying us? Trillion and billion-dollar corporations spent years building these spaces that millennials and Gen X just ate up. And Gen Z's like, I would rather work in a box on the street if it means you pay me 30% more, rather than working in one of these psychologically hacking buildings.
Our girl Phoebe Lee went on to say, as the months passed, I really came to understand the term corporation. More often than not, a company's objective is not for you to grow, for you to learn, or even to make the world a better place. Its primary objective is to maximize shareholder value. The rich people who have large ownership in the companies are made even richer. I couldn't help but think how I had reached such high levels of education and learned to solve such complex problems just to be toiling away with repetitive work as a tiny gear in a machine that all but likely does not make any positive contributions to the world. But while it's great that Gen Z is pushing for a better work environment than the traditional work until you die mindset of previous generations, still not everyone's having positive experiences with them. And unfortunately, as much as I want to leave things on that high note, there's another side to this. Aside from Gen Z just wanting to make the workplace healthier, I've heard a lot of employers say that Gen Z are, in fact, bad workers. Personally, I feel like a lot of this comes from the modern school system and how it's a drastic change moving from that to the work environment, and specifically the way discipline is handled in schools. Children used to be held to expectations by their teachers and parents and had to follow the expectations of school to get through it. Now, with the fears of children falling behind, there's a lot more hand-holding, and teachers don't have the same abilities to keep kids in line anymore.
One of the things that pisses me off more than anything these days is the state of the education system in North America. And the state of the education system right now is scary. Kids are falling behind. Kids are falling very behind. You're seeing kids enter high school with barely a 4th grade skill set. There's that whole concept of no kid left behind, the no kid left behind program, which really just leaves every kid behind. We stopped letting kids being able to be held back a grade. So you're having a kid who can barely pass grade 1 skills just being pushed to grade 2 because you can't hold him back. Who do you think that's benefiting? Absolutely no one. And it happens at every level. We have it happening at the very basic level of elementary school where these kids can barely function at the grade that they're at, and yet they're being pushed on, which is just setting them up for failure. And at the higher end in high school, even when I was in high school 10 years ago, you have teachers bumping grades so that kids can get into university. Well, what do you think that does? That just raises the acceptance average. The acceptance averages for university go up and up and up and up every year, and it's not because kids are getting smarter, it's because their grades are being artificially inflated. Because instead of students just being told they should work harder, They should study more in order to get into these programs. They're just being handed it.
What is grade inflation?
They all expect to get A's no matter what. But years ago, it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
I've been teaching for almost 40 years, and I feel a lot of pressure on myself to give the students at least a C, even if they're not doing the adequate amount of work.
At least where I live, kids are no longer forced to fail grades if they are failing a grade. The BC Ministry of Education says report cards are to communicate student learning to families and are not intended as a tool to provide information to future teachers about a student. There are no prerequisites for any BC course, and awarding an F in a grade or course does not prevent a student from moving up to the next grade or course. And so it's up to the parents to decide if a child will be held back because of poor performance. And a lot of the time, parents won't hold their child back because they don't want them falling behind their classmates. Teachers are also very limited in the discipline they can use in schools and therefore aren't able to teach those skills required for the workplace. And this is not to say we need to bring the ruler back, but if there aren't consequences for failing to meet standards, then kids are going to have a rude awakening when they enter the workforce and get fired for not turning in their work on time. And these effects of school have only been amplified with Gen Z by, of course, social media culture, where you should always be prioritizing yourself over your work.
A snail girl takes the time and creates to create. She's running her own race, and maybe that race isn't going anywhere but home and back to bed.
The I don't dream of labor trend is healthy when done right, but if it's taken too far to the point where kids don't think they have to listen to any authority in the workplace, it's not going to work out well for them. And so these young people come into adulthood not sure what boundaries are okay or are not okay to push because they're young. For example, it's okay to use sick days that are available to you and not feel bad about using them, but it's not okay to skip out on work early because you had an appointment that you didn't tell your boss about. Is it even a fine line? There's a line there. I don't think it's that fine. I think it's an obvious line, maybe just for us. And so I feel like there's a bit of truth on both sides of this conflict, where Gen Z is doing a good job standing up for themselves in the workforce, but some of them just aren't doing it right. So, to end things off, do I think Gen Z is just a drain on the system and won't amount to anything? Obviously not. I think Gen Z is just adapting to a bad hand given to them, relative bad hand, but still a bad hand, and they're trying to make the most of it. While the pushback against schooling is a bit extreme, there is some validity to it. As we've discussed, there's a lot of problems. The good news is we are seeing some creative solutions. I recently heard that Jordan Peterson is creating his own university that is supposed to be more affordable, like very affordable. And whether you love him or hate him, I don't care. It's just cool to see people trying to come up with new solutions to these really big problems that seem insurmountable. I do think there are still some issues with Gen Z's work ethic. Overall, not everyone. We're not trying to group everyone together here, but my hope is that those problems will be ironed out as Gen Z spends more time in the workforce and learns those boundaries that they can't push. And like I said, hopefully this pushback on the status quo will, in the end, benefit everyone. I also need to note, as per usual, now is your time to subscribe if you enjoy video essays on parenthood, culture, and community. That's what I like talking about. Sometimes other things, depends on what I'm feeling. And they come out once a month, so if you're not subscribed, you might miss it. As for the ending of this video, I think it's important to remember that everyone's a product of their environment, and Gen Z is just adapting to the environment they inherited. They may have their problems, but they do also bring fresh perspectives that can help reimagine and strengthen the societal foundation laid by the previous generations.
It's ringing. Hey man, do you have a second to talk? I was just calling to let you know that I'm giving up.
Wait, like on your career and future and everything? Or?
Yeah, dude, everything. I'm just gonna expect the worst in all aspects of my life from here on out.
Oh my god. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. You're like the first person I've told. I knew you'd want to know because you've just been encouraging me to throw in the towel for so long.
I'm glad you're telling me right now. That means a lot.
Yeah, dude, I'm like, it still doesn't feel real.